I like to thumb through old camera catalogs and bulletins to look through all the beautiful hand-drawn ads, pondering over the weird cameras that never really made it, but also to read and speculate on some of the obscure camera companies that vanished from the history of photography. These catalogs are like epitaphs for the people, the inventions, and companies who tried to carve their names into that great tree. In a way, they are the only thing these people had to show they existed. This is how I found the Crown Optical Company, a company whose history, lack thereof, is steeped in underlying melancholy and impending doom. Like Sunset Boulevard, you know the hero dies, and it's always just around the corner, but you want the full story. So, I will do my best to present the full story of the Crown Optical Company. Since their catalog is virtually non-existent, and since there's no photos of the company or really their products, I'm using their ads as B-roll. Unfortunately, we will never have a full history of Crown Optical like we do with Kodak or even Rochester Optical. There's hardly anything in the way of photographic evidence of the company. There aren't many records, and my main sources only briefly describe the company in a few short sentences or blurbs. I had to instead look through old camera magazines, club bulletins, photography yearbooks, and city directories just to glean crumbs of information. Hell, I had to turn to forum discussions, Flickr posts, War Department records, university documents, and congressional hearings to scrape up as much history as I could find. And even now, the picture I'm about to paint is sadly incomplete. But what I could find is genuinely fascinating. Crown Optical was founded in 1906 by A.H. Hatmaker and A.E. May in Rochester, New York as a lens manufacturer. In fact, according to The Shield in 1910, Harry May, A.E. May's son, also worked for the company. And in the American Business Encyclopedia and Legal Advisor for 1913, Willard C. Grain is listed as Crown's general manager, and who was also a research assistant for Edison Labs? Holy shit! We should also not confuse it with Crown Optical Company Limited, based out of Japan, which started decades after Crown Optical dissolved. Our Crown Optical produced many photographic lenses, some of which were used in Seneca cameras, but their largest product was binoculars. In fact, a Google search of their company reveals a vast landscape of military binoculars, which we will discuss shortly. Since Crown was based out of Rochester, it meant they were able to share light in the great photographic pantheon alongside Kodak and Bausch & Lomb. Ironically, while the company's year-to-year history is murky, we are able to see a glimpse of what their company culture was like. According to the October 1909 issue of the Optical Review, Crown Optical moved plants from 484 South Clinton Avenue to 65 Atlantic Avenue. But more importantly, the annual Labor Day outing of employees was held in Seabreeze Park, now Seabreeze Amusement Park. Quote, "Special cars carried the merrymakers to the resort, and the day was spent in various sports. The married and single men played baseball, and the game resulted in a victory for the Benedicts by a score of 16-3. Jesus Christ. 16-3, Jesus Christ, guys. In the following month, November, we can see that co-founder A.E. May was Crown's advertising manager. According to the Optical Review again, May, quote, left Rochester October 16 for a Western business trip. He will visit Chicago and other cities. We can assume they were not a small potatoes company, but perhaps on caliber with Bausch & Lomb. I also stumbled upon coverage for the 29th annual session of the Photographers Association of America, which was held from July 19th to the 24th in Rochester for Camera Magazine. To read from the review, on Friday, quote, "The Crown Optical Company was busy with Messrs. Hatmaker and May telling about their crowning efforts." This was not the only convention Crown Optical attended. In the January 1914 issue of Photo Era magazine, Crown Optical was an exhibitor at the second annual Photographic Dealers Association convention, which was held in Chicago from March 24th to the 27th at the Hotel Sherman. The photo here, though blurry, was taken at the convention, which means one of these pixelated men was either Hatmaker or May, or both. Unfortunately, this is the only photo of them that I know of, and I have no idea where they are in it. The 1910s were interesting for Crown Optical. We can briefly track the growth of the company from 1912 to 1913 using the Industrial Directory of New York State and the documents of the Assembly of the State of New York, respectively. By 1912, Crown Optical held 2 addresses, one at 299 State and another at 65 Atlantic. Recalling the Optical Review in 1909, 65 Atlantic was their manufacturing plant, which by 1912, according to the Industrial Directory, had 25 male employees. Their offices, however, had 41 male employees, 2 female employees, and an office force of 6. That number slightly decreased by 1913. According to the documents of Assembly, their office had 36 male employees, 8 female employees, and only 3 general office employees. They went from a total of 49 total office employees to 47 in 1 year. It's important to know that their plant, located at 65 Atlantic, does not appear in the 1913 documents of Assembly, leaving me to speculate if they lost the plant within 1 year or it just wasn't listed. I even wonder if they were sharing a plant with another company. In 1914, the world was at war, and while the US would not formally enter it until 1917, the war machine was already grinding. In an unspecified year, probably 1914, Crown Optical received a contract to manufacture binoculars and other optical instruments for the US military. This contract allowed Crown to prosper rather nicely. Now, before we get into specifics, let's talk about how the production workflow ran during wartime. Optical manufacturers like Crown could only make optical devices, like lenses and glassware. Makes sense. Other components like straps and frames and compasses had to be subcontracted out of house. However, the assembly could remain in-house. Now, because equipment was usually stamped with the location of where it was assembled, many military accessories inexplicably bore the name Crown Optical or Bausch & Lomb. If we look at the war expenditures, which was compiled for a hearing with the House of Representatives in 1919, we can see Crown Optical's contract was listed as 8-12-0201, and a supplemental contract 8A-12-0201 under Captain L.J. de Milhau and Major L.D. Waldron, respectively. Now, I find this very interesting. The $150,000 contract, which includes the supplement, was listed under Crown Optical and issued July 15, 1918, and February 6, 1919, whereby Crown only fulfilled $81,540 of that total contract. I find the dates and Crown's name attached to those dates interesting because in 1917, Crown was nationalized by the US government and renamed to the U.S. Naval Gun Factory Optical Shop Annex, or NGF Annex for short. So why was their name in this document after it had already been changed? According to the Book of Navy Ordnance Activities from 1917 and 1918, quote, in December 1917 it became necessary in order to meet the binocular situation for the Bureau to take over the plant of the Crown Optical Company of Rochester, New York, factory becoming the optical shop annex of the Naval Gun Factory. This was because Crown Optical did not have the manpower necessary to meet the demands of the contract, ultimately leading to its nationalization and placed under the management of Lieutenant Commander L.C. Schiebla. Quote, the difficulties encountered by the company had caused serious interference with deliveries. And they go on to say, quote, having failed in its obligations to the government, was commandeered by the Navy Department. Like, geez, way to lay it on thick, guys. After this, the company reorganized and manufacturing picked up when all the original employees were sacked and replaced by a legion of enlisted men. In that same war expenditures document, we can see that Crown Optical was issued a contract numbered 1573 on August 21st, 1917 of $715,000, in which only $127,425 had been fulfilled. This falls in line with the ordinance. A contract was issued to Crown in August 1917, the company fell behind, and in December, it was nationalized.
So why was their name mentioned in 1918, 1919 then? I'm not sure, but I suspect the military hung on to the name as a way to kind of keep track of all the companies that fell under its wing. Truth is, I have no idea.
Going back to the Navy Ordnance Book, quote, Crown Optical was administered until the close of the war, when most of its activities were transferred to the optical shop at the Washington Navy Yard. We may never know why the military used its name throughout the war, but what we do know is that the Crown name never progressed past the end of the First World War, and the company itself never returned to private ownership. 1919 was the end for Crown Optical. Or was it?
This is where things get interesting.
Crown Optical appears one more time in the annals, this time in the June 24th, 1920 issue of the Drug Trade Weekly. Of all places. The headline reads, Drug and Chemical Firms Ready to Resume Trading with Russia. Indeed, Russia was undergoing a major civil war between Lenin's Bolsheviks and the Provisional Government, Red October and all of that. Russia was now the Soviet Republic. In the Drug Trade Weekly, quote, Ludwig C.A.K. Martins filed with the Senate Relations Committee in Washington in February a list of 941 firms and corporations in the United States which, he said, had significant desire to do business with Russia. Among the firms and corporations named were the following, and right near the beginning, Crown Optical Company, Rochester.
Okay, so who the flying fuck is Ludwig Martins?
Well, he was a Marxist Soviet diplomat and revolutionary who, in 1919, was the subject of investigation by the Lusk Committee, which was formed by the New York State Legislature to investigate people and corporations in New York State who were suspected of sedition. They raided Martin's agency, the Russian Soviet Bureau, believing it was planning a violent coup against the US government. Martin's intention, however, was American recognition of the new Bolshevik government. At least on paper. Yes, before the communist Red Scare of the 1950s and McCarthyism, there was an older Red Scare of Bolsheviks that ended in 1920. Now, allow me to speculate. Martins might have had a list of company names before 1920, probably between 1917 and 1918 before the October Revolution, and Crown Optical, having not been nationalized yet, was one of those names. In fact, it could all be a different company. Further in my research, I noticed Crown Optical as a name, especially in Rochester, kept popping up in all these different magazines and trade catalogs, but they were not the same Crown Optical as the one that we're talking about. They were different. So it's entirely possible that this was a completely different Crown Optical. Truth is, I have no idea. Crown Optical's history is still mostly obscured, but nonetheless fascinating. This one company, a grain of sand along the beach, had somehow touched two major world events, and yet no one knows their name. If nothing else, Crown Optical is a testament to how fragile the business ecosystem is. One minute you're on top of the world, your crowning achievements displayed at every convention, and the next, your name gets mentioned by a Bolshevik revolutionary testifying to Congress against sedition charges. Life comes at you fast, and it sure as hell did for the Crown Optical Company.